We're back at our next items up for bids to install a new cooling fan. It's the cooling fan that runs on the drive shaft and it cools off the transmission pump and the rear axle. Last summer this thing was getting really hot, and that is before I broke one of these fan blades off. But it was getting even hotter after that. This tractor has always been either put in a shed or stored outside under a tarp. So I never really had a lot of experience with having it in the garage and like walking past it a couple hours later or anything. So I don't know if they just get really hot or if it was the fluid I had in it, which was probably not the right fluid, or if it's also the leaking rear end that's making it get really hot because the pump's probably cavitating. It's drawing that air through that leak. But anyway, we got a new fan to put on it because I broke the old one being stupid. And this is a new drive disc, or fiber disc, or whatever you want to call it. What it really is a rag joint. If you're familiar with like automotive steering, a lot of times there'll be a rag joint in there instead of a universal joint. And these things run them on the drive shaft because these are shaft driven tractors. They're not belt driven. So it's got a drive shaft like a car. So it was engine, drive shaft, transmission, transaxle. When I was in it last summer, that guy was getting pretty fragged, and since I've got to tear it all apart anyway, just put a new one in it now. The first step of doing that is I've got to take this tunnel cover off this guy. So that transmission tunnel has to come off. And then I think I'm probably going to have to remove this cowling piece here that also holds the fuel tank to be able to drive a roll pin out. So I'll get some work done and we'll get back to you. There's just 4 bolts that hold this guy on, and then he slips out, and then there's just a handful of bolts that holds the gas tank on, and have to disconnect it from the gas tank or the carburetor and all that. So we'll get to it. I've got the tunnel cover off of it now, and you can see where this stuff goes. You can see that rag joint's just really messed up. She's due for a new one. And that fan's just held on with a snap ring, which you can access once you get it out of the tractor. Before I do that, I'm going to try to make a mark with the paint marker, so I get the fan back where it's supposed to go. This conglomeration of washers and stuff right here is because this thing comes with like another paw on it that comes up here, and with that installed, it takes a ton of travel out of the hydraulics. So the easy hack, or the simple hack here anyway, is I just put a pin in there with some washers as spacers to get the hydraulic cylinder. I guess I should have explained that. This is the hydraulic cylinder. And just get the cylinder spaced out where it's supposed to go to take, because I got rid of the thickness of that bracket. Now when the deck goes up and down, it has like 3 or 4 more inches of travel than it did from the factory. But anyways, kind of a consequence of that, this comes right into the arc of the fan. So if the fan's too far forward, it'll contact this, and we don't want that. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. So I'm going to just try and get behind this guy with the paint marker and kind of make a little line on the back of it where it goes, and we'll take care of that. And I was right to get this drive shaft out. There's a roll pin that holds it on at the engine side. And to get that guy out, we are going to have to take the fuel tank and stuff off, which is not a huge deal. It's just 6 bolts. It's that one down at the bottom, and there are 2 that kind of hold it onto the tower. There are 2 just like that on the other side, and the fuel line at the carburetor, and that's not a big deal. So I've already got the air cleaner off, and I just need to pop that clip off the carburetor, and then we should be able to wiggle that fuel line loose. We'll just take the filter and everything with it. These didn't come with a filter. This is a Max exclusive edition upgrade, and I think I've got a little bit better geometry now. Yeah, you got to take these 2 bolts out and that guy down at the bottom, and then this whole gas tank assembly and everything lifts up out of our way. So I got the gas tank and stuff out of our way. It wasn't a big deal. I did decide to disconnect the fuel hose at the filter. It's just easier to deal with. The roll pin we want to take out is right there. You'll see that slot. It's a little pin at the end of it. And it's actually in a pretty good position right now to get on the other side and just whack it through. So I'll do that, and then on the other end, I just have to take out those 4 nuts and bolts that hold that rag joint in. And it's a little easier to do that without that pin in, because then you don't have to turn the motor over to do it. And then she pops out. No big deal, really. I was getting pretty nervous there for a second because that shear pin that used to be down in there was a real nightmare to take out. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, I've had, I put a new fan and stuff on this thing before, And I don't remember taking this thing out, and if I took it out before, I would have anti-seized it and it wouldn't be coming out so hard. So uh-oh, maybe I'm doing stuff I don't need to do. It turns out, yeah, you do need to do that. With that out of there, you can now just slip the drive shaft inboard. So it just slips in that coupler, and we can take this old one out. You can see without sliding it forward, it's got this like nipple that keeps this disc from like flinging out of the tractor if something really bad happened. And it dawned on me, oh yeah, every time I've replaced one of these or one of these, I've had this, it's because I've split the tractor. I don't want to get into the backstory on this thing a lot right now, but I've split this tractor a whole bunch of times. If you don't know what that means, when you split a tractor, or at least when you split one of these, it's when you take basically from this part backward and take it off. In this case, that's the transmission, the pump, the rear axle, the rear tires, all that stuff, and you just take it out. So if you split the tractor, you would just unbolt this right here and leave this alone. So I don't think I've ever had that shaft out of there. And speaking of, fun story again, not to get too off in the weeds about the history of this thing just right now, I'll probably make a history video on it like I do all my projects. They all have stories. Is the shear pin I took out of it is not a shear pin. This is like a bolt or something that somebody cut off and stuffed in it. You know, you can see where they took probably a first cut at it or whatever, and it wasn't long enough. And stuffed in it instead of putting a real shear pin in it. So that's wrong. I'll have to see about getting a proper shear pin for it. Although I gotta confess, I'm tempted to put it back the way it is because I know it has been that way for like 30 years. And if you look down here, there's a shear pin on the hydrostat side of things. So there's a roll pin in there that runs this pump. So if something bad ever happened, it would break that one anyway. You know, it would break one or the other, and plus there's that rubber biscuit right here. You'd have to fail to absorb the shock in the rubber biscuit or the rag joint and have that not break before something bad happened. So I'll have to see if I can get some roll pins. I'm kind of anal with roll pins. I like to get stainless ones, and you can't buy those at the hardware store. You have to order them. And that's precisely because they love to rust up in the holes, and then they're a nightmare to remove. So it's like, well, if I did the work the first time, I'm gonna put a stainless one in there and anti-seize it, and then I never have to worry about it being a nightmare again. Yeah, but to get I guess back off into the weeds a little bit, this thing's been in my family since like 1990, 1991, but it's a 1974. And I'm pretty sure the first owner or the first 5 owners or whoever had it before we did just beat the tar out of this thing. Because I found stuff like that all over it before. Just goofy stuff. It feels a lot like this thing was on a farm and they were using it as like a farm tractor and not a garden tractor. Like another example would be there's shear pins in these arms too. You can just see the divot right above my finger where the hole is for one of them, and I think in fact this one might be broke, which would be my fault. I've replaced these shear pins before, and what I found in here when I did it the first time is there was a bunch of baling wire because the shear pin had broke, so they stuffed the broken pieces back in there and ran baling wire through it to hold them in the hole still. And I guess you do what you have to do when it's time to get work done, but good God, man, go back and fix that right later. I found all sorts of crazy things like that all over this thing over the years. I was getting nervous, didn't need to. Slid this shaft out with that biscuit out. I should be able to get the shaft the rest of the way out. Yeah, there it goes. Now if I can just jimmy it. Yep, there it comes. And there's old Toothless. I did that doing something stupid last summer when it was like 105 degrees in here and I was getting mad. I tried to rotate the engine over by the fan to tighten up one of those biscuit bolts, and just not thinking about what I was doing, which if you've been watching for a little bit, you know is one of my favorite activities. It's not thinking about what I'm doing. And decided to grab onto this $15 plastic fan and snap a blade off of it. So awesome. So we get to put a new one on now. The hits keep on coming. That's done. Shouldn't be a big deal to put it back together. So I got to looking at this guy a little more, and I noticed something interesting. That clip in there that's supposed to hold the fan on, that's just like a circlip, has just about fallen off. I wonder if that's because of the imbalance in the fan, because it's missing a blade, But either way, I can't really mark where that fan is and trust where it should be to put the new one. And plus, I think I had that one kind of artificially far back from when I had that other float linkage on the lift cylinder. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and put the tractor together, and if I have to adjust it later, I can. But it was interesting. I was about ready to just launch that circlip off of there, or run it down the shaft at least. So I got the new fan and fiber disc in, and I think right now this cylinder is pretty much as far extended as it gets. So I don't think we're going to have an issue with the cylinder potentially running into the fan. I'll start it up and I'll be ginger with the hydraulics, and I'll make sure this is at the end of its travel. And once I determine that, I might move this fan forward, because I've got a feeling the further forward you can get it, the better off you are. So it's not just running, deadhead air right into this thing, so it has a chance to flow over it. And I showed you guys that other fiber disc before, and turns out she actually was like completely broken. So I actually think this is my fault. I think I am prone to over tightening those nuts and bolts on these things. This one was only, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. I mean, old enough, right? Maybe 100 or 200 hours on it. And these things are known for going for decades. So I think that was all me. I think I screwed that one up. Also, this pin, not a pin, that we talked about the last time, I'm actually not sure if this is not a pin or if it has just been broken, so it's way too short. I don't think the front up there at the engine is supposed to run a roll pin. I think it is supposed to run like a solid dowel type pin, but this one's not right. I did go ahead and find a stainless replacement, and by the way, that was sold for marine applications. It was, guess we'll be finding that. It was for a boat prop, so holy crap, those things are expensive, because of course it is, it's for a boat. So it was, they're like $4 a piece, and shipping on them is going to be God only knows when. So I'm probably going to put that one back in, but then if that one gives us a problem or whatever, I'll hopefully by then have other ones to put in. So I just got to knock that guy back in, and then this leg of the project's done, I think. Well, done enough to run, and then we'll see what's going on with the fan. But yeah, done.